Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. All right, I'm super excited for this episode of the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. I have been looking forward to it for a really long time, and this is going to be my top 10 horror films of all time. Super stoked to do this episode. I love horror movies. My wife and I, we watch them all year round, all the time. And I had a lot of fun putting together this top 10. Some people may be a little bit surprised of this top 10, or maybe not. There really isn't any examples of that kind of elevated horror, that kind of like new term that people are throwing around. Cerebral horror. I don't know. There are some of those, I guess, but I don't think there's any movie on my list that anybody would ever call a work of elevated horror. I like really popular horror movies for the most part. There's a lot of insanely popular movies on my list. I'm kind of a populist when it comes to a lot of the cinema that I love. One of the things that I like about most of the movies on my top 10 is that they are kind of infinitely rewatchable. And so I don't think a lot of the elevated horror movies are very rewatchable. They're kind of like good for that first time, but then after that, they're not at that entertaining level that I look for in a really good horror movie. I also did not really include any kung fu horror movies because I usually consider those more kung fu first, and those might appear maybe on a top 10 kung fu list. And so I guess let's just get into it. Let's start talking about my top 10 horror movies of all time. Now, one of the things I did as kind of a little game with the Dungeon Dive patrons is that I assigned each one of my movies in the top 10 a keyword or a couple of keywords that very, very generically describe the movie. And I posted those in order on the Dungeon Dive Patreon, and I asked people to guess what they thought the movie was based off of that word. So I'm going to, when we start going through the top 10, I'm going to read those, read the word and read the guesses, and then that'll give me some other films to maybe talk about. So this is going to be a longer episode. So I really hope you enjoy it. I've put a lot of effort into this, and I'm just I'm super excited to do this. But okay. So let's start with number 10. And number 10, the word I chose to describe this movie is gross out. And here are some of the guesses people had. Human Centipede. That is pretty gross. Not a great movie, but one that I would never want to happen to me in real life. Human Centipede 2 is even more disgusting. Man, that movie... Wait, is that... I think Human Centipede 2, I think that's the black and white one. Wow, that movie goes places. Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead, great movie, almost made it into the top 10. Peter Jackson's totally gory, overflowing with gore and blood zombie movie, fantastic movie. Mandy I consider more of a fantasy movie, and so that is going to appear on a list a little later down the road. Martyrs, man, what a brutal movie that is. Brain Damage, very, very weird movie, but kind of like a alien brain parasite. Hostel and Saw, not my cup of tea, but those movies, some of that early torture porn stuff was at least interesting. It was visceral. Audition, good movie, but again, that's more like elevated. I don't want to rewatch Audition. It was really good that first time. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, good movie. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 almost made my list as a comedy. I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I think that movie's brilliant. Last House on the Left and Society. Oh man, Society, one of the great endings of all time. So gross. But yeah, so number 10 for me is The Fly, 1986, directed by David Cronenberg, starring Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. And I'm also going to list a couple people who help make these movies as good as they are. And that is The Fly is made great by the makeup effects by Chris Wallace and Stefan Dupuis, I believe. So this is a remake. There are 2 remakes on this list, a remake of an old science fiction classic. But here, Cronenberg really ups the ante on the gross out body horror. Jeff Goldblum, of course, plays Seth Brundle expertly. What a great performance. He's a scientist, and his experiment goes wrong where he's trying to transport matter, transportation of matter, and he gets his DNA merges with a fly DNA, and he starts to transform into a fly. There's all this vomiting on food in this movie. Teeth are falling out. Fingernails are being pulled off. There's this incredibly disturbing pregnancy nightmare. The movie is just really gooey and gross. I'm really thankful that movies don't have smell-o-vision, because I would not want to smell Seth Brundle's loft apartment. My God, that thing is so disgusting by the end of the movie. And that final transformation where the final version of the fly bursts through Seth Brundle's skin, and man, it is gross. I love The Fly so much. David Cronenberg was really on the top of his game during this era with a number of science fiction horror flicks like The Brood and Rabid, but I think The Fly is his best, and just a fantastic movie. Okay, so now we're going to go on to number 9, and number 9, the word I chose for this is mood. Some of the guesses were Mandy, From Dusk Till Dawn. I think the beginning of Dusk Till Dawn is very moody. I love the first half before it turns into a horror movie. The Following. I'm wondering if they got it confused with It Follows. I think The Following that's the Christopher Nolan movie, I believe. More of a thriller, but yeah, a pretty cool movie. The Shining. We will be talking about The Shining in some context a little later, but good mood in that. Hereditary. Yes, good mood. The Wailing I have never seen. It Follows. Very good soundtrack in It Follows. Night of the Living Dead. Yes, great mood. A Quiet Place. The Babadook and Midsommar. The Babadook and Midsommar definitely in that elevated horror genre or subgenre or classification. So again, nobody guessed on this one, but for me, number 9 is from 1962. And that is Carnival of Souls, directed by Herc Harvey. This was Herc Harvey's only feature film. As a job, I believe that he was a director of like industrial and educational movies. This movie stars Candice Hilligoss and Sydney Berger, and a real standout cast member or a real standout member of the production is Gene Moore, and he did the music, and this movie has an amazing organ score that really helps to set the mood. So Carnival of Souls, it feels like an extended episode of The Twilight Zone, but with a heightened cinematic quality to it. It was made for only $33,000 completely outside of the studio system. It is a bold independent production. The film deals with death, an attempt to escape death, and the realization that death always wins in the end. It's very dreamlike and surreal, with one of the most haunting sequences ever filmed where Mary, the main character, is playing organ at a church while the dead are rising up from their watery graves and they start to dance to this spooky organ music. It's very slow, haunting. There are long stretches without any dialogue, just images and that organ soundtrack. Wonderful, wonderful movie, Carnival of Souls. Okay, let's see, number 8 here. Number 8, the word I chose is terror. And some of the guesses were The Descent. Fantastic movie. I will never forget the first time I saw The Descent. Just what a tense movie. I am very claustrophobic, and that movie scared me quite a bit because of that claustrophobia of being trapped in a cave. Terror Vision. I've never seen Terror Vision. I know that the VHS box art I can see in my mind. I passed by the movie many times at the video stores, but I've never seen it, so I should watch that. Martyrs, Psycho, great movie. Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Last House on the Left, and Alien, all great choices, all great movies, but nobody guessed it on this one, and that is from 2012, and that is Sinister, directed by Scott Derrickson. Scott Derrickson actually directed the first straight-to-video Hellraiser movie, Hellraiser Inferno. And I think Hellraiser Inferno is actually a really good movie. Sinister was produced by Jason Blum. Jason Blum, of course, the owner of Blumhouse Productions. I love Blumhouse movies. I'm a huge fan of their output. I love their modern horror. Insidious, Happy Death Day, Upgrade, Freaky, Ouija, Origin of Evil. That almost made my top 10. Brilliant movie. But Sinister stars Ethan Hawke, and with music and sound design by Christopher Young. So Sinister is really the only movie to truly scare me as an adult, and a lot of that has to do with the music and sound design from Christopher Young. It is a truly terrifying sounding movie. Dissonance, kind of industrial, just, oh man, the sound of that movie really gets under my skin. And Mr. Boogie is one of the scariest movie monsters of all time. I love movies and books about writers struggling and getting wrapped up in these weird and supernatural things. So the true crime author angle of Sinister really hits home for me. I also love movies and books about haunted things and things that dwell within things. So the depictions of Mr. Boogie in the snuff films in the movie is just fantastic. The deaths depicted in the snuff films are truly terrifying, especially the one with the people drowning in the pool. I am super claustrophobic and super afraid of drowning. I hate going underwater. So this is one sequence that literally gave me nightmares for weeks. Yeah, Sinister is, man, that movie is so good. Okay, I'm coming up at number 7 here. The word I chose for 7 is fun. And some of the guesses were mini guesses for Army of Darkness. I'm actually not a huge fan of Army of Darkness. I thought that they kind of rejected the horror a little bit too much in that movie. Another guess for Brain Dead, Evil Dead 2, great movie. I love Evil Dead 2. The Nightmare on Elm Street, close. Shaun of the Dead, good movie. And Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. That's a really inspired guess. I like Temple of Doom a lot. Yes, it's super racist and super like colonial, but it's a really good pulp adventure movie. And it really is a horror movie. So yeah, really good guess there. But the closest guess was Nightmare on Elm Street. And my number 7 is from 2003, and that is Freddy versus Jason. This one I'll probably get a lot of flack for, but I think I can defend this movie. Freddy vs. Jason, directed by Ronnie Yu, a great Hong Kong film director who did Bride with White Hair and Fearless. I think he had the most interesting career of any of the Hong Kong directors who came to Hollywood. He made this, he made Bride of Chucky, 51st State, and Warriors of Virtue. And this was written by Damien Shannon and Mark Swift. And the plot for this movie, the script is so good. So I'm a huge fan of both franchises. The Freddy and Jason, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. But I think this is the best of them all. It is so well written in terms of plot, like way better than it has any right to be. Shannon and Swift turned out an amazing story that expertly brings these two iconic killers together. So at the end of the previous Friday the 13th movie, Jason Goes to Hell, at the very end of that movie, Jason is dead and buried, and Freddy's clawed hand shoots up from the ground, grabs Jason's mask and pulls it down, and it pulls Jason into hell. So the two killers are in hell at the beginning of Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy is no longer able to invade the dreams of the children of Springwood because he's trapped in hell, and the parents of Springwood have created a drug that stops kids from dreaming so they forget about Freddy. Freddy needs people to be afraid of him to have power, so Freddy resurrects Jason and sends him to Springwood to be a stand-in boogeyman to get people scared again. But Jason starts getting all the attention and stealing Freddy's kills, so Freddy gets jealous. Just, man, what an awesome setup to this movie. And the writers use the themes of victimhood and oppressor, water and fire to great effect. Jason is kind of like an eternal, he started out as a victim, He was bullied as a kid and drowned in a lake. His weakness is water. Freddy is a murderer. He's an eternal murderer, a child rapist, and a killer. He was burned to death, so his weakness is fire. And throughout the film, the motifs of water and fire are used, and the story actually paints Jason as an antagonist to root for. Of the two, you end up wanting Jason to win. Ronnie Yu breathes fresh air into the slasher genre with an amazing eye for action and framing. There are so many great scenes, so many great deaths, and so many memorable moments in this movie. The final 15 minutes or so is basically like a Monday Night Raw WWF with Freddy and Jason battling it out in a burning cabin and a surrounding construction zone, ripping chunks of flesh off each other with black nasty blood oozing all over the place. The movie has a ton of like blood geysers and sprays. It is such a good looking movie. I went into the theater with incredibly high expectations because I loved Ronnie Yu, and I left feeling as though Ronnie Yu had created and crafted a perfect love letter to Freddy and Jason. It was way better than I could have ever imagined. All right, so number six, the word I've chosen is cosmic. And some of the guesses are a couple of guesses for Event Horizon. Really good movie, love the movie. The Abyss, Color Out of Space. I did not like Color Out of Space at all. I thought it was really, it looked really nice, but I thought it was really poorly written. The dialogue was bad. And Nicolas Cage is, he's really hit or miss for me, and that was a complete miss. His performance I thought was really weird. From Beyond, a couple guesses from Beyond. That's a good one. That's Stuart Gordon, I believe. Yeah, good movie. The Thing, a couple guesses for The Thing. That movie's okay. Leprechaun 4 in space. I've actually seen Leprechaun in space. I actually saw Leprechaun 1 in the theater, and it was one of the only movies that I ever fell asleep at the theater while watching. Alien, good movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey, interesting choice. I don't know if I would ever consider that a horror movie, even though it is kind of weird. But for my number 6, for cosmic, I chose Empty Man from 2020. And that is directed David Pryor, based on a comic book by Colin Bunn and artist Vanessa R. Del Rey, starring James Badge Dale. So, The Empty Man, it was finished right before the pandemic and then shelved. It was only released in a handful of theaters, finally released to streaming, basically left to die, had terrible marketing. It will probably never be released on Blu-ray. It only made $5 million. It was a total flop, and it has one of the worst trailers ever. It makes it look like a silly kind of like Slender Man, creepypasta urban legend movie, and it is an absolute masterpiece. I thought about putting this movie at number 1. I just couldn't yet because it's so new. I need to give it time, but it is one of the best works of cinematic cosmic horror I've ever seen. I watched it 3 times in a single weekend. The 15-minute prologue is masterfully executed. The first time I watched the movie, I actually checked that I had selected the right movie to watch because it has nothing to do with the trailer. And the trailer sold this movie. I thought I was just going to be watching some silly little creepypasta movie. And I was just home alone on a Saturday. I thought, this will be something to pass the time. But the prologue just comes out of nowhere, and it sets the stage for this cosmic horror by rooting the mythology of the film into the Earth's long geological history. It made me think of Jeff Long's amazing book, The Descent. So after the prologue, the film switches gears into the territory kind of covered in the trailer, these weird occurrences and deaths surrounding an urban legend of the Empty Man. But then the movie again completely switches gears and goes into full-on cult, esoteric, secret society territory, cosmic horror, and contains one of the scariest and most intense sequences I've ever seen, in which our hero drives out to an old abandoned camp compound and discovers a terrifying secret. At 2.5 hours, it's an epic horror film. It's brave, incredibly well written, bizarre, surreal, wonderfully acted and directed. Just an absolute masterpiece. And that is The Empty Man. Okay, number five, the word I chose is religious. And some of the guesses were multiple guesses for The Witch. I did not care for The Witch very much at all. It was okay, good performances and good atmosphere, but I didn't really get much out of it. The Exorcist, a few guesses for The Exorcist. Midsommar, Martyrs again. A lot of people guessed Martyrs on these. That's a tough movie, man. The Wicker Man, The Omen, Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby is fantastic. I kind of consider that more of a comedy, but like a weird, like a Satan comedy or something. But a couple people almost guessed it with The Exorcist. So my number 5 is The Exorcist III from 1990, written and directed by William Peter Blatty, starring George C. Scott, Ed Flanders, Jason Miller, and Brad Dourif. My favorite William Peter Blatty movie is The Ninth Configuration, but it's not horror, even though it is the direct sequel to The Exorcist. It is part of William Peter Blatty's trilogy of faith. The Ninth Configuration is a work of Catholic apologetics set to like a thriller, and Legion Exorcist III is the third part of this trilogy. William Peter Blatty is one of my favorite writers. He is brilliant. He's very funny, and the Exorcist novel is very well written and very funny. So is The Ninth Configuration, and so is The Exorcist III. And while The Exorcist is a great movie, I love the original Exorcist, I think it lacks that humor and the great funny dialogue from the book. It lacks a couple of the things that I really look to Blatty for. But The Exorcist III has that, and it also has the horror. It also has, it just has some of the best dialogue ever in a horror movie. The conversations between Scott and Flanders are just brilliant. And it's also damn scary. It has one of the best jump scares of all time. For those of you that know it, the hospital hallway scene, oh my God. I don't care how many times I see it. It is always surprising, just pure horror perfection there. And Brad Dourif's portrayal of the possessed man is off the charts good. And Jason Miller's return is utterly haunting. So that was The Exorcist III. Number four, the word I chose is drama. And some of the guesses were Texas Chainsaw, Jacob's Ladder. I love Jacob's Ladder. Fantastic movie. Dracula 1931. I've never seen the original Dracula, so I need to watch that. Rosemary's Baby, 28 Days Later, and a few guesses for Get Out. So nobody guessed this one. Nobody really came close. The closest was a previous guess for The Shining, but it's not The Shining, it's the sequel, and that is from 2019, and that is Dr. Sleep. Mike Flanagan, brilliant director. He directed Ouija, Origin of Evil, which almost made this list. An incredible movie. He did Gerald's Game, Midnight Mass, based on the book by Stephen King, starring Ewan McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson. So like The Empty Man, Dr. Sleep was another box office bomb. It bombed so bad that the planned Shining prequel that Mike Flanagan was going to work on was canceled, and that really pisses me off. So my history with The Shining, Dr. Sleep. I love The Shining, the book. It's one of my favorite King books. It's kind of the book I think of when I think of Stephen King for some reason. I think it's that old silver cover of the mass market paperback. And but I am not a huge fan of the Kubrick movie. I think it's an okay movie, but as far as adaptations go, I think Kubrick really missed the point of the novel. The portrayal by Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance I don't think it's a good depiction of the character from the book. He kind of starts off already kind of crazy and at a level 10, and you don't get that slow build up to the madness from the book. And I think that the movie kind of misses the point of the horrors of alcoholism on the character. Conversely, Dr. Sleep, Stephen King's follow-up, the book, I don't like the book at all. I think the book is really boring and it's not well written, and it completely misses the mark. So I love the book The Shining, don't like the movie. I don't like the book of Dr. Sleep, and I love the movie. And that kind of shows, it kind of tells what the kind of movie that Dr. Sleep is. When I was watching the movie, my wife and I went to see it in the theater. About 10 minutes in, I leaned over to her and I said, "This movie's really good." And then another 20 minutes went by and I was like, "This movie is like really, really good." About another 20 minutes and I was like, "I think this is a masterpiece." And I've watched it 4 or 5 times since seeing it in the theater, and every time I like it more. And that really does have to do with the dramatic performances of the actors in the movie. It has 2 of the best performances ever in a horror movie, I think, and that's from Ewan McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson. Ewan McGregor's Dan Torrance feels more like the Jack Torrance from the book. He is struggling so hard with his alcoholism, and it's a real burden, and I love his portrayal. I think The Shining really failed the character of Jack Torrance, and I think Ewan McGregor kind of he saves that part of the book by turning in this performance as Danny Torrance. And Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat, oh my god, one of the all-time great screen villains. Her group of psychic vampires, the True Knot, is so creepy. When they kill that baseball kid, oh my god, I couldn't believe what I was seeing on screen in this movie. Just terrifying. There's an astral projection sequence where Rose the Hat sends her spirit out into the world, and she goes to spy on this kid who also has the Shining. Brilliant sequence. The whole last sequence, the finale at the Overlook Hotel. Mike Flanagan recreated some of the shots from The Shining, but he shrunk the set down to make it look smaller because now Danny is an adult, so you have a very different look at a similar setting. Henry Thomas comes in as Jack Torrance's ghost, and he delivers a fantastic performance. This is just a masterpiece of character-driven horror. It's long. The director's cut is the way to go. It's like, I think it's almost like 20 or 30 minutes longer. It pushes the movie close to 3 hours, but I love every single second of Dr. Sleep. Brilliant, brilliant movie. Okay, number three is the word I chose is comedy. And some of the guesses were multiple guesses for Shaun of the Dead, great movie. Multiple guesses for Army of Darkness, we've talked about that already. Tucker and Dale versus Evil, really, really good movie, totally up my alley there. Frankenhooker, what an inspired guess there. Frankenhooker, Brain Dead, Border I need to see, I haven't seen Border yet. The Burbs, yes, The Burbs, great. And finally, somebody guessed it, and that is from 1981. That is American Werewolf in London, directed by John Landis, with effects by Rick Baker, starring David Naughton, Jenny Agutter, and Griffin Dunn. For a brief period of time, John Landis was the king of 80s cinema. He had this stretch from like Kentucky Fried Movie, Animal House, Blues Brothers, Trading Places, Twilight Zone, Spies Like Us, Three Amigos, Amazon Woman on the Moon, and Coming to America. Just like, this guy could do no wrong during this period. American Werewolf in London is such a totally bizarre movie. It's really batshit insane. It's so oddly paced and structured. There really isn't anything like it. There's a moment right in the middle of the climactic third act where the main character goes to a porn theater and has a conversation with a zombie. It's that kind of movie. There's a dream sequence where these Nazi demons invade this house and kill a family. There's the extended opening sequence in the bar with the satanic imagery and out on the moors. The movie flows like a dream, carrying the viewer away into this nightmare realm of comedy and horror. And then, of course, you can't talk about the movie without the incredible effects from Rick Baker, which include probably the best werewolf transformation ever filmed. Baker made turning into a werewolf look like pure torture. There's the sound of bones growing and snapping and ligaments tearing and skin stretching. It's so good. Everything is top notch. And all of the weirdness is kind of like perfectly sold by the cast. I don't know how the cast made this movie. It's a very brave movie. You know, most comedies kind of rely on this kind of like straight man, funny man combo. But in this movie, those roles really aren't present. It's a horror film and a comedy film that subverts the rules of both. And that's really why it's in my top 10. Okay, number 2, coming in at number 2, the word I chose was creature feature. And some of the guesses were multiple guesses for Alien, great movie. Multiple guesses for The Thing, kind of a mediocre movie, really. A guess for Border, Let the Right One In. Train to Busan, love that movie. Gremlins, I prefer Gremlins 2. And The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I remember watching that as a kid in 3D on TV. But yes, a couple people guessed it here, and that is, of course, The Thing from 1982. John Carpenter, music by Ennio Morricone, starring a great ensemble cast with featuring Kurt Russell, Keith David, and Wilford Brimley. Storyboarded by Mike Ploog, a great fantasy artist, a heavy metal artist, and with effects by the one and only Rob Bottin. John Carpenter's The Thing, another remake, so 2 remakes on the top 10. It's one of the best looking movies I've ever seen. The anamorphic widescreen looks incredible, especially with the way it stretches and distorts the light from all the flares used for lighting in the movie. It just looks like a movie should look. It feels like a movie. I know that's a weird thing to say, but nowadays with digital filming, movies don't really look like movies anymore. When I think of how a movie should look, I think of John Carpenter's The Thing. The premise is simple and effective. A long-buried entity is unearthed, unleashing this alien force full of paranoia. It is apocalyptic. As a matter of fact, it's part of John Carpenter's thematic apocalypse trilogy, along with Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness. The ensemble cast is off the charts good. It's an all-male cast. I think the only female presence is in the voice of the computer when Kurt Russell is playing chess, I believe. The setting feels lived in and tangible. This is a real quality of 80s movies, and one that is also shared by my number 1 coming up. The characters feel real, their conversations ring true, their actions make sense. They completely sell the premise. And even though the plot is outlandish, the movie has this sense of realism to it. And those the effects, oh my god, just off the chart with the effects. Effect work is otherworldly, probably the best practical effects ever created. There's that chest bursting scene, the head spider, the dog creature. This is truly a celebration of the physical art of filmmaking, and that is The Thing. Okay, coming up, number one, the words I chose were haunted house. And some of the guesses were multiple guesses for Cabin in the Woods, really fun movie. House 2, The Second Story, great movie, great sequel with probably the best sequel title ever. Somebody chose a movie called Poltergeist. Then there's the others, House, The Conjuring. I love The Conjuring movies. Patrick Wilson is one of my favorite actors. I almost thought about including Bone Tomahawk on this list at some point. Ready or Not, really, really fun movie. Not really a haunted house movie, but really a fun movie. And somebody chose The Haunting from 1963, a movie I almost included as mood. But yeah, so somebody guessed it, of course, and that is number 1 from 1982. That is Poltergeist. Directed by Tobe Hooper, maybe directed by Steven Spielberg. This movie feels nothing like a Tobe Hooper movie. It feels totally like a Steven Spielberg movie. I know there is some rumors that maybe Steven Spielberg actually directed it. I'm going to give the credit to Tobe Hooper because he is a good director. It was written and supervised by Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg's fingerprints are all over the movie. It stars Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, and Heather O'Rourke. Poltergeist is a perfect movie. There is nothing wrong. There's nothing I would change. There's no way to make Poltergeist better. Everything about it is perfection. The story, the dialogue, the setting, the effects, the lighting, all perfection. The setting, the house, their house feels lived in. It looks like any number of houses I lived in the 80s. I want a coffee table book all about 80s homes in movies. The home is messy. There's clutter everywhere. The furniture looks and feels lived in. Just what a fantastic setting. And the setting goes such a long way to create a place in which all of these weird things happen. The dialogue for the movie is so good. Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson are probably my favorite on-screen married couple of all time. I love their banter. I love their relationship. I love that they love their family. It's a very non-typical family for Spielberg. Spielberg seemed to focus on broken homes with single parents or parents who were in conflict. But Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson, the characters in this movie, they love each other and they really love their family. And that's kind of like the whole theme of the movie. When the two characters at the beginning of the movie, when they roll the joint on their bed using a Ronald Reagan book as a table, just hilarious and kind of a rejection of the Reaganite politics that were so prevalent in this era. Really, really good. The story is perfectly paced. It has a nice ramp up to the horror. It starts funny, gets scarier as it goes, and then erupts into this just incredibly climactic ending where just everything goes wrong. The effects combining composite shots, lighting and animation, everything feels of a single piece, and it all works together in the confines of the home because of how the setting was established. And it's also really scary, especially for a PG movie. I can't believe this movie was only PG. It has a scene where a guy peels off his face. Just all the sound effects and the plight of Carol Ann being trapped by the TV people in this other realm. Just such a great movie. I love Poltergeist. I watch it every year. I'm reading the book right now, the novelization of the movie, and it is really good. I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, that was my top 10 horror movies of all time. Starting at number 10, we had The Fly from 1986 by David Cronenberg, Carnival of Souls 1962 from Herc Hervey, Sinister from 2012 from Scott Derrickson, Freddy vs. Jason from 2003 from Ronnie Yu, The Empty Man from 2020 from David Pryor. We have The Exorcist III from 1990 written from William Peter Blatty, Dr. Sleep from 2019 from Mike Flanagan, American Werewolf in London from 1981, John Landis, The Thing from 1982, John Carpenter, and at number 1, Poltergeist 1982 from Tobe Hooper / maybe Steven Spielberg. So, all right, you guys, let me know what movies you disagree with. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to disagree with Dr. Sleep and Freddy vs. Jason. I bet most people would have wanted me to select Exorcist 1 rather than Exorcist 3. I bet some people think I should have more elevated horror on my list. But yeah, let me know what movies you love down in the comments. Maybe we can talk about some good horror movies. So, all right, guys, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.